Hello, everyone, and welcome to Native Database Protection is Not Enough, and it surely isn't. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. I am with Actual Tech Media. My name is Keith, and I am excited to be your moderator for today's discussion. But before we get to that content, we do have some housekeeping items I need to let you know about. First off, we encourage you to take advantage of this time to ask our experts questions. Just drop them in the questions box in your webinar control panel throughout the event. That Q&A panel that you'll see up there off to your right is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. You want to start with a browser refresh. If you have problems hearing or seeing something, you may have to do a couple of refreshes before things get back to normal. If that still doesn't work, let us know and we'll hop on and try to help you out. Okay, next, take a look at the handouts section. That's right there next to the Q&A panel. You'll find a bunch of great free resources there, including a link to explore more about Rubrik, today's sponsor. You'll also find a link there to the ATM Decisions Group, which is a panel of IT decision makers that you can apply to join to participate in more in-depth events and other special opportunities. In that handouts section, there's also a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events just like this one. Probably a bunch of them are going to interest you, so check those out and sign up. Finally, at the end of this webinar event, we are going to be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one of you listening to me right now. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire event to qualify. If you want to see what all that means, official terms and conditions of the prize drawing can be found in the handouts section. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get on to the main event. I am thrilled to introduce you to our presenters today. They are Justin Ruiz, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Rubrik. He's been with us a bunch before and always does a great job. And we also have Michael Fal, the Director of Database Solution Architecture for Rubrik. I like that title. So they are ready to go. Justin is going to be speaking first, so I'm going to hand the mic over to him. Justin, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on native database protection just isn't enough. As mentioned, my name is Justin Ruiz, and I'm a product marketing manager here at Rubrik. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Michael Fal, who's actually the leader of our database specialist team here at Rubrik. Mike comes with a ton of experience with databases. So I, for one, am very excited to have him here with us. We're very lucky to have him. Mike, did you want to say a couple words to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Great to be here. Great to be able to talk about this with our audience. I think there's a lot of great information here and things that they're going to walk away with that will help them out in their day-to-day. Just a brief history about myself. I've been at Rubrik now for 6.5 years. Prior to that, I was a SQL Server DBA for 17, as well as playing around with some other databases, but again, primarily SQL Server. So, lived and breathed databases for pretty much my entire professional career. And with that, a lot of interesting perspectives that I think we're going to dive into today. So looking forward to the conversation. I'll let you kick us off then.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, as you know, your business runs on some data, and databases help make your most critical data in your business useful. And so securing that kind of data is essential to your organization's business resilience. And so today, we're excited to share with you how Rubrik keeps your database and your company running in the face of any threat. And so we'll start by taking a quick look at the current landscape. We'll explore, some of the key kind of challenges that database teams face related to data protection. But we'll also look at, some of the required capabilities that database teams need to prioritize to keep their database data resilient as a result, before finally, really showing you how Rubrik addresses each of these requirements and how we can help. And last but not least, we'll close things out with some additional resources that I think you'll find super useful. So a pretty packed agenda for you today. With all that said, let's dive in. Okay, so starting at the top, and as many of you probably know, your databases power applications that run your organization. And so what that means is if your database is down, then more than likely your company is probably down. And so actually in one of our first reports from Rubrik Zero Labs called The State of Data Security, 98% of organizations reported experiencing some sort of a cyber attack, which means that your organization has most likely experienced one of these at some point along the line. And it has never been more critical for organizations to get their databases protected and quickly restorable to ensure that your business can get back online as quickly as possible. However, that's a lot easier said than done, right? The DBA's job is more difficult now than it has ever been before. And it only promises to get more challenging as the volume, the variety, and the complexity of applications and data increase across the cloud and on-prem. And so what you see on the screen is a common database environment. You have production databases, you have backup storage, you have copies, you have restores. But these approaches, to backup and recovery leave databases kind of vulnerable, and they create kind of these data silos and make it difficult for database admins, for IT admins, and even SecOps to work together to meet the company objectives and ultimately protect these systems. And DBAs, not only are they having to manage hundreds or even thousands of databases, jobs, backups, and all of the other adjacent systems that make, common tasks and administration possible, but now they have to increasingly worry about ransomware and other types of attacks. And so as we know, the goal of ransomware is to deny access to your own systems. And what's the DBA's job and what are they in charge of? Well, it's the databases and the data that's contained within them. And so when ransomware attacks a database, and the database backups, it becomes a very, very difficult and challenging day for that team who's managing that system. And so a typical enterprise, uses legacy databases for legacy applications. There's a variety of cloud and on-premises databases for analytics. There's in-memory databases for demanding applications, document databases to power dynamic applications, and so on. Each of these databases have their own tools for backup and restore, along with different business SLAs. And so dealing with this complexity is expensive. It creates those silos that we mentioned, and ultimately it increases the risk that critical data will be left unprotected. And so on top of that, there is no global kind of catalog for everything, making reporting and other administration tasks super manual, and ultimately, making it very, very hard to kind of analyze and wrap your arms around those systems. And so to make matters worse, data volumes are growing very fast, and that's kind of driven by transaction volumes as well as needing to use richer data in applications. And so the growth in data collection can be attributed to the increasing use of analytics, cloud migration initiatives, and even the proliferation of IoT devices. For example, retailers now track more data about each consumer than ever before. And at the same time, the backup kind of windows have remained the same or have actually decreased, which is driven by the need for higher availability. And so this means backing up data and making it available for testing, for refreshes and operational recoveries. They often exceed, the desired SLAs. But what we find is that most of the time, organizations are kind of unable to rapidly recover what they need when they need it. For example, recovering specific tables or specific sets of rows, when they need. Legacy tools are just kind of often restricted to all or nothing recovery methods that just really take a lot of time. And this adds operational risk and is just much slower than often desired by the organization. And now, sadly, many DBAs are still using purpose-built, backup appliances or secondary storage systems that are just susceptible to these styles of attacks. And so simply put, secondary storage systems and purpose-built backup appliances can just not satisfy the requirements of modern data protection based on the challenges that we're seeing in the market today. And so many organizations still rely on insecure architectures that require, loosely coupled backup hardware, software, secondary storage systems, which just creates a larger attack surface. And just imagine, waking up to all of your backups being deleted and the backup software just being incapacitated in some sort of a cyber attack. And the business is down, as you scramble to bring up, the backup software and databases with really any offline copy that you might be able to find. And all of these challenges are compounded as you add more databases. And as we've already touched on, and as you already know, not uncommon for an enterprise to have multiple database engines kind of running at once. And that's everything from Microsoft SQL and DB2 to Oracle and SAP HANA. And so together, all of these challenges are having a huge impact on organizations. And we see it in the questions, database teams are asking us. Questions like, how do I keep all of my database data secure and available to recover in the face of cyber threats? How do I maintain a backup and recovery SLA when the data volumes are increasing and backup windows are shrinking? But also, kind of similarly, how do I rapidly recover only the data that I need and make it available to secondary kind of users? As well as, how do I centrally manage the numerous databases in the cloud as well as on premises? And so this is why at Rubrik, we believe there are a whole new set of requirements that organizations must have in order to protect databases in this new modern age. And the first is keeping databases data secure and available to cyber attacks. And so enterprises need a resilient and unified platform that delivers air-gapped, immutable, and access-controlled backups that can be easily replicated and archived to multiple locations. But they also need some automation in that protection. And so this is to ensure the data is always being protected in these rapidly changing environments. And organizations need policy-based automation that can discover, secure, and manage that retention of data and the variety of their databases across the enterprise and the public cloud. And with all of these databases in multiple places, these enterprises need unified protection across cloud and on premises, like I just touched on. And that means organizations need a single console to really manage that database, irrespective of its location, variety, or volume, with ease of use and self-service from a single access controlled platform. And with all that data, these enterprises need faster backup and restores at scale. And because of all this data that is now being kind of generated, organizations need smarter and higher performing backup technologies to deal with larger volumes of data within shorter backup timeframes. Instantaneous recovery of data at any scale is also a critical requirement. But what about the recovery? After all, what good is a backup if you can't restore it? And so enterprises need that ability to recover what they need when they need it. And this is the flexibility to restore specific data or entire workloads en masse. And these requirements are super critical. You have security and automation, you have the single control plane, you have performance and efficiency, and you have recovery. Mike, question for you. When you see this list of requirements, what comes to mind as someone who has managed these types of systems at scale? Are these things obvious? Are they top of mind? Do you think these things are kind of known by folks in these roles today? Would love your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's one of those things that I think it's so ingrained in how we go about our day-to-day that we don't tend to think about like, oh, I need these capabilities, right? But when you sit down and you start listing things out, it sort of brings focus to the fact that, oh yeah, we've got all this stuff to juggle. We've got all these things to manage. Gosh, it would be nice to have, something that kind of bring this all together for us, right? It's just sort of, it's like under the surface where we don't really think about it too much because it's just part of the day-to-day. But then when you sit back and you kind of take stock, it's like, yeah, I really need stuff like this.
Yeah, great points, Mike. And so with that said, how does the Rubrik Security Cloud platform start to address some of these requirements?
So yeah, when we start to talk about what Rubrik can offer and how we address these capabilities, like a lot of this stuff is just ingrained into how Rubrik is built from the ground up. So we start first by talking about what does Rubrik do and Rubrik Security Cloud do around keeping the databases and secure and available. This is really it's a tricky one to answer in the sense that it's not something that you can just go pull up and point at and say, oh, look at this button. This makes it secure and available, right? It's really about our foundation and how we built Rubrik in the first place, right? The fact that we built this purpose-focused file system to provision or to store data in, designed it with immutability from the ground up, with this sort of logically air-gapped design from the ground up, right? We built security around it, role-based access controls, all these various things. It's just so ingrained into how the platform works that like everything else that we do on top of it is just sort of natural, right? So you have just this step one, ground floor, whatever you want to call it. We are built to be this zero trust by design platform that has that every other operation that we do has that built into it. Then when we start talking about automating the protection, right? So Rubrik has this idea of what we call an SLA domain, and we'll get into this a little bit here as we kind of dive into things, right? But the SLA domain is a declarative policy. If we think traditionally how a lot of these tasks have been made, right? We're all used to creating schedules and setting them up to run at certain times and balancing all that out. And that puts a lot of the work onto the user, right? And Rubrik, we stepped back and said, look, we're going to redo this all. Like, let's let the platform do all the heavy lifting. Let's let it do the work. Tell the user to then say, hey, this is what I need. And then Rubrik will figure out the details around that. So really, automation is built into the platform, almost like to the degree of the zero trust by design that we were just talking about. The automation is like, okay, well, we're going to do zero trust by design, but we also need to make it easier on people. So we're going to automate as much as we possibly can. And that's, again, if we dive a little bit more into it, that's where this SLA domain concept comes into play, right? If we think about, like, in general, as a user of any system, any, data, we're going to say, like, the business knows, hey, we need backups on this frequency, right? We need them daily. And we need to store those backups for X amount of days. And then we need to aggregate those into a monthly backup that we keep X amount of months, or a yearly backup that we keep for a certain amount of years. Hey, we need to move it from the primary backup location and we need to replicate it over to this other data center for disaster recovery purposes, right? We need to store long-term in the cloud because we want to make sure that we have that in case of a disaster. All these different things that, again, it's all stuff that we're like, oh yeah, we're used to managing this. But instead of now having to keep all those different pieces and parts straight, Rubrik will control all this using our SLA policy architecture. Now, of course, the next thing is unifying the protection across the enterprises, right? So this is one that gets a little tricky. But if we start to think about, okay, well, we know we back up SQL in a certain way, and maybe we have SQL agent jobs for that. But then we also have cron jobs for Oracle, and we're using RMAN scripts for that. And then maybe I've got another set of shell scripts that do MongoDB backups, for example, right? And all the different database platforms, because the reality is, like, in today's enterprise, you don't have just one database platform, right? You're usually having to support a couple different ones. And of course, the challenge is, well, now we have different backup methodologies and recovery methodologies for these different databases. So what Rubrik can give you is, by bringing this all under the same umbrella, your backup and recovery processes all work the same, right? You create a single, or maybe 3 or 4 SLA domains across your databases for whatever business rules that are applied. And then regardless of which database you're protecting, if the policy says, I need this, Rubrik will call the appropriate APIs or job scripts or what have you to actually execute that in a way that the database understands. The additional piece of this, right, is now you also start to have a centralized catalog, because Rubrik, because it's doing all this work, obviously we record all this stuff, we track it historically, we can give you reports and all sorts of data on the execution of these backups and restores as well, right? but it's all in that same platform. So instead of having to write your own processes or use a separate tool for each database to bring it all into one place, it's just built into the platform for you. Now, the other thing here is managing database protection efficiently. And this is very similar to that zero trust by design. So one of the things that we realized with Rubrik is sort of the traditional way of backing up databases is you may take a full or a level 0 once a week. And then daily you take a level 1 or a differential, right? And then I've got my transaction logs or my archive logs or whatever, your transactional history that we also have to store. And each database platform does this a little bit different. But when we sit back and look at how that's all being taken, the fact that we're doing those complete full backups of the databases periodically starts to become a real burden on the back end. Because if we think about it, and if we're backing up all that data every week, even if very little has changed, right, we're starting to duplicate stored data for really no reason at all other than that's just the way the database platforms do it. So with Rubrik, we said, let's see if we can implement an incremental forever approach, which, if we just think about it, makes sense, right? We only should be backing up and moving data that changes. And so Rubrik has built into our database processes the ability to do these incremental forever backups, which means whenever we take a backup, from basically the database engine standpoint, every time we run like a daily backup, Rubrik thinks the database engine thinks we're taking a full database backup, or again, a level 0, right? Under the covers, depending on the database engine, right, we're going to do some additional work to basically say, look, only capture the changed data and move that across. And then what we store historically is what you could call a synthetic full, but really is we take that incremental data, we merge it into the history, and we're basically able to store the backups that you need historically without moving all that data every time. So it's not something that I can just like open up a window and point and say, hey, look at that feature, right? But it is so ingrained into what we do and really provides a lot of benefit. And sort of the upshot of all this is if we're moving less data, yes, we're storing less data, but then we're also basically doing less work. So, back to something Justin had called out when we were going through the kind of the current lay of the land, right? There's more and more stuff that we need to back up and less time to do it in. So now because Rubrik will move only change data, manage only change data, we're cutting your backup times down because we're only going to be doing work on that change data. So it's a huge benefit, and it's really a key value add from what Rubrik does for databases. Now, of course, the final piece here is recover what you need when you need it. And this actually ties back to the automation. Again, because Rubrik can control everything, we know where everything is. We know all the historical chains. Rubrik can then allow you as the user to pick a point in time, and then we'll automate what you need to do to get there, right? So if we look at sort of Rubrik's recovery screen, you're going to see something like a timeline where you just pick a time in there and say, hey, I want to restore to this. And you, of course, provide, here's where I want to restore it to, and information about maybe where the files live or any sort of startup parameters or what have you. But then Rubrik will do all the work for you to get it back. All you have to do is pick that point in time. And then we sort of layer on top of this our functionality called Live Mount. Because one of the challenges restoring databases, it can be a lot of data, right? It might be a couple terabytes, it might be 100 gigs, what have you. But moving all that data across the wire and landing it on storage, there's really kind of two challenges with that, right? One, I need the time to move that data, to get it across. But then the second thing, of course, is, I need to be able to have somewhere to land it, right? So I might have to go to the storage teams and work with them to create new disks or expand existing disks or what have you. Well, Rubrik, now what we can do is this Live Mount, which instead of you having to provision disk, because Rubrik, we haven't really talked about it in too much detail, but Rubrik is its own appliance, right? We have our own storage and our own compute. So what we can do is we can provision some of that storage on Rubrik to then present your database files back through it, attach it to an existing SQL, Oracle host, what have you, but then basically bring the database up where the storage lives on the Rubrik appliance. And this does two things for us. So first off, one, we don't have to go out and provision any additional storage to do this. It just It's on Rubrik, and it's a little bit of storage magic to use it, right? You're not going to actually consume any additional storage on Rubrik. We're just going to do some pointers and whatnot to present it. But then, of course, the second thing is because no data is actually moving across the network, writing to new disk, it can come up very quickly. And we're talking like, 3 to 5 minutes for terabytes worth of data. And so this becomes a very useful tool for you to rapidly get at your data. Things like, hey, somebody dropped 500 rows from the production database, and we don't want to restore the whole thing. We just need that 500 rows. Now you can bring up the live mount as a copy, and it is a fully functioning database, and all you need to do now is use your weapon of choice, maybe something like BCP or import, export, dump for Oracle, what have you, but use your tool to just copy it out of the live mount, which is another database, back into the production database. You can use it for things like creating a reporting copy. Maybe you want to do test dev on it, some troubleshooting. Really, it's a tool in the tool belt that you can use and gives you that rapid access to your data and can really unlock a lot of potential for you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring Justin back in here, sort of kind of wrap it up for us, talk through some of the resources that you have. So Justin, with all that being said, what do you have here to share with folks before we end it up?
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And so as you've heard today, and as you've probably already experienced yourself, protecting databases is really no easy task. And with today's current landscape that we walk through, it only promises to get more challenging. But the good news is that Rubrik is here to help with our zero trust design, that global policy-driven automation, that incremental forever approach to backups, that global catalog management and control, and definitely last but not least, that flexible recovery and live mount capability. You can really keep all of your databases safe and kind of readily available, so you can always recover only what you need when you need it. And so Rubrik has a lot of experience protecting databases. Rubrik as a company was founded in 2014 and has only really been selling for the last 8 years. But in that short amount of time, Rubrik has delivered purpose-built protection for Microsoft SQL Server, for Oracle Database, MongoDB, Cassandra, SAP HANA, DB2. And so we see the trust and belief in these solutions, with our momentum. And I'm proud to share that, Rubrik is protecting databases for more than 3,500 customers with nearly 2 million database objects under management today, with some of the largest databases under protection coming in at that impressive 600 kind of terabyte mark. And that's from customers, big and small, across multiple different markets and across the globe. And they all trust Rubrik, to protect these mission critical systems. Customers like Wed2B, the Estee Lauder companies, Pampered Chef, and even the Aaron's company. All right, with that, as we start to close things out, just wanted to share a couple of the resources that I thought you'd find interesting or helpful. The first is an ebook that explores what modern data protection really entails. It examines, the difference between the legacy and kind of the modern approach. The second is a longer form white paper that takes a look at, how to accelerate backup and recovery speeds, protect against ransomware, and ultimately kind of start to bridge that gap between the backup and the database admins as it relates to database protection. For those of you who want to go a little bit deeper and maybe even get hands-on, I would highly recommend taking a look at a great program we call Rubrik Explore, which is a collection of guided product tours. Great way to get hands-on, don't necessarily need to talk to anybody. There's a tour both for Rubrik for Microsoft SQL, as well as for the Oracle database. For the SQL tour, you'll be guided through assigning those SLA domains that Mike mentioned. You'll be able to configure the SQL log kind of shipping. You'll be able to run a live mount, and you can even try out the restore operations down to a single item. On the Oracle side, it's pretty similar, but also enables you to test out our advanced cloning options, which are pretty powerful as it lets you kind of execute those pre and post scripts as part of your recovery process. In addition to these resources, definitely want to encourage you to reach out to Rubrik if you wanted to learn more. We'd be more than happy to get in touch and share how customers are protecting large database environments today with Rubrik. And Mike and team can even get engaged. They can even provide a personalized kind of demo or walkthrough based on your environment if that's something that would be interesting for folks. So definitely encourage you to reach out. The last one that I wanted to mention that's not represented on the slide today is that we actually just ran um, our virtual event that's dedicated and focused on databases. It was actually called the Database Recovery event, and that happened just before the new year. It's available on demand. There's some keynotes that kind of land the higher level story around what's happening in the market and the opportunity, as well as some dedicated sessions based off database type. And so we actually get a little bit more detail on the walkthrough of some of these key workflows and capabilities, if that's interesting. And finally, I thought we could take advantage of having Mike here with us as one of the specialists and ask him a couple of questions. Please absolutely feel free to ask any questions you may have, and the Rubrik team will follow up with you offline post-event. But with that, I wanted to start by asking you, Mike, what brought you to Rubrik? If I'm not mistaken, I believe you were a DBA at one of your last companies. Did anything surprise you about the platform?
Yeah, so from a technical standpoint, I remember in my interview with our CTO at Rubrik, he asked me like, well, how would you do an incremental forever backup with SQL? And as I was used to the way traditional DBAs would do stuff, right? And I used a lot of the same scripts that are out there that people know about. I was sort of like a little bit, I guess befuddled would be the right term. So one of the things that surprised me was just some of the technical things that we were doing. Because once I came on and I got to dive into like how we did incremental forever and what we were doing about it and how it was, leveraged within the platform, it was actually really cool. And it just sort of opened my eyes to the possibilities. And then, of course, it's one of those things that we always think about backup and restore as just so core to what we do. We forget how, I guess, tedious it is, right? And that's, I will always tell people that, like, it's vital, it's important. You need to have your backups, but it's also one of the most boring things to do in a DBA's job. In fact, in most of my previous roles, I would automate that thing first because it's like, okay, I want to spend as little time managing this as possible. So the fact that like something like Rubrik just out of the box makes it easy to address that. And I've shown customers how to do it, right? I can protect, basically a couple hundred servers in about 15 minutes, right? By configuring the policies and applying them and leveraging Rubrik's automation. So I guess that's the thing. The other thing that surprised me is just, how easy we made it as a platform. And I'll be honest, I've been here for 6.5 years, and say what you will, I'm a true believer now.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's always really interesting to hear, how important, backup and recovery is, and, really important checkbox that you have to have, especially with what's going on in the market. But it's also one of those things that we hear actually turns out to be pretty painful for a lot of customers. So great points there. And so when you and I were prepping, and even throughout this event, you had mentioned that you'd been at Rubrik for over 6 years. So super awesome achievement. Definitely a lot of customer conversations during that time, I'm sure. And so with that in mind, when you look at the conversations that you've had with customers, is there anything that, you think database teams aren't thinking about today that they should be?
Yeah, I mean, this one's actually pretty easy. I don't think DBAs and database teams are thinking enough about the security around their backups, right? We are so used to, as DBAs, writing our backups to a storage location and then just assuming it will be available to us. We're sort of relying on other teams to manage that, to take those backups, sweep them off to long-term storage. And because of that, we do a few things to basically, cover our butts. One of those is, we say, oh, well, we're going to keep like a week or 2 weeks worth of backups there. So if something happens, I always can restore from that. Right. And we're always pushing to say, hey, we need to store more backups. And obviously that creates a lot of friction, but we forget, or we don't think enough about, well, where we're writing those backups, how vulnerable is that, right? And we don't think about bad actors coming in and compromising those backups or compromising the storage. And that's the thing. You can have a great backup strategy, but if somebody comes in and encrypts your backups, you're dead in the water. There's nothing you can do. Right. So I think, and this is where, again, you talk about what surprised me about the platform, right? In the first question, this sort of ties into the same thing, right? The fact that having immutability baked into the backup process, I don't have to think about it as a DBA, right? I go into Rubrik, I configure my backups, I get everything running, and it's just there. And so that gives me a lot of peace of mind that I didn't really have before, because no matter what happens, no matter what they might do to the environment or what they encrypt, I can be rest assured that my backups in Rubrik are going to be secured because of the way that the platform is built.
Right. Yeah, a lot of great points there. I know that, from talking to customers, it seems like there's kind of these two recurring themes. One is, related to security, having a tool that can kind of empower and bring these teams together, and actually be a part of that. A lot of investment in security that companies should continue to do, but it's also clear that prevention, detection, keeping people out is not foolproof, and so you need to be able to have something to fall back on. But also, the second theme, you need to be able to do that in a way that lends itself well for these teams to operate at scale and give them time back and make it as easy as possible, right? And so it makes a ton of sense. And so one last question for you, as a long time DBA yourself, and obviously from your time at Rubrik, what would you say has potentially changed for the DBA role, if at all? And is there anything that Rubrik can do to help?
Well, yeah, I think a lot has changed, really. Some of it stays the same, and a lot of what that falls into, even if it's staying the same, there's just increasing complexity to what we're being responsible for. We sort of talked about it earlier in the presentation, right? The fact that most enterprises now don't have a single database platform. As a DBA, I now have to be familiar with more than just what's my main platform of choice, right? I might need to know SQL, and I might need to know Redis, and I might need to know Mongo, and I might need to know Postgres, right? Or, Oracle DBA is a similar thing, right? Oracle and Postgres, and maybe MySQL as well. So, having to manage multiple database platforms, having to manage more databases, right? Data volumes are growing. Everybody's getting more data. We're not getting less. We're not cleaning stuff out. You can have a conversation about whether or not we should be cleaning stuff out, but unfortunately, that's not up to the DBA. They're just like, you got to manage it. Here you go. And then, of course, we talk about like security just being more and more of a focus point, right? When I was a DBA, like when I started out as a DBA, I mean, I'm dating myself here a bit, right? But I was helping manage databases right around Y2K, right? And there's a big, hey, can we keep this up? And there's a lot of conversation about keeping things available. And like security was sort of a thing, like, okay, well, we want to make sure we didn't have people accessing the data inappropriately, but certainly not to the degree of ransomware attacks that we're seeing today, right? Certainly not seeing kind of encryptions or data exfiltrations that are a problem or are a reoccurring theme today. So, have those things changed? Absolutely. And that's where, again, I know we're sort of pounding the drum here, right? But this is where a platform of Rubrik, that's why I think it's so timely in the industry right now, and why, again, I'm a believer of what we do, because it really does help address these problems, right? It really gives our customers the tools to solve these issues and give them peace of mind, right? I've just been doing this long enough that, like, it's one thing to say, oh, this is a cool tool and all, right? But it's another thing for me to say, yes, this solves problems for me. And honestly, if I were still out in the world being a DBA, a tool like Rubrik would really is something I would be taking a long, hard look at, because of everything that it does and all the things that it can help me with.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, a lot of great insights there, Mike. And for folks on the line, with that, that's all the content that we had for you today. Hope you found it helpful and interesting. A big thank you to all of you for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And, thanks again, Mike, for joining us and letting me, for one, pick your brain. I always definitely enjoy our conversations and love to learn from you. So with that, I will pass it back to our host for them to close this out. Thanks again.
And thank you, Justin. Gee, what a great presentation. Love that. So much good information there. So, as Justin had mentioned earlier, folks, they can't take live questions today, but they will be following up with all of you who had questions, and that was a bunch of you. There was lots and lots of questions for today's great session. And that's pretty much a wrap for us for today, except for the last piece of business, which is giving away the Amazon gift card. And the winner of that $250 for this event is Brad Schoen from Missouri. Congratulations to you, Brad. We will be in touch ASAP to get you your card. And with that, folks, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik for making this event possible. Thank you, the attendees, for being here with us today. It's always a pleasure of mine to spend some time with you. Thanks for your great questions, and I can't wait to see you in the next event. That concludes this session. Have a great rest of your day, folks.